The new Austrian commander would be Kaiser Franz Joseph. He would attempt to regain some control over his defeated army. The Kaiser could have used the natural defenses of the Quadrilateral to hold the Allied invasion at bay, as Radetzky had done in 1848, but he was fickle and impatient. He wanted to move against the Allies and dispute their recent capture of Milan on June 8th. As the French and Italian soldiers captured Milan, small-scale uprisings were flaring up in the duchies. Franz Joseph still believed he could beat the French army in the open field, and he felt he had to, in order to prevent further rebellions. Now that the campaign had truly begun, the Allies were experiencing logistical problems similar to those which plagued Charles Albert in 1848. Although Cavour vastly expanded the Piedmont rail system, it was not able to meet the demand of the army during the invasion. The French Navy was even forced to deliver rail cars via Genoa to keep the flow of supplies and men running. By late June, Franz Joseph called an advance all up the line. He intended to take Milan back by force. At the same time, the Allied armies were about to cross the Ticino upriver. The two forces collided unexpectedly at the sleepy little town of Solferino. The fight that followed would be the largest and most deadly since the carnage of Leipzig. More than 130,000 French and Piedmontese soldiers met the Austrian army of similar strength on the battlefield on June 24th. The Battle of Solferino and its consequences are etched in history. It was the incarnate of destruction. There was little to no maneuverability since the armies were not expecting to find one another. The French left concentrated its forces on the Spia d'Italia. To give you some idea of what this horrific battle was like, the following excerpt is from A Memory of Solferino by Henry Dunant. Quote, "The Austrians, from their vantage point on the hills, swept the French with artillery fire. Facing the thunder of these batteries, the French rushed forward like an opposing storm sweeping the plain. Every mound, every height, every rocky crag is the scene of a fight to the death. Bodies lie in heaps on the hills and in the valleys. Austrian and Allies trampling each other underfoot, killing one another on piles of bleeding corpses, felling their enemies with their rifle butts, crushing skulls, ripping bellies open with the saber and bayonet. A little further on, a squadron of cavalry, which gallops by, crushing dead and dying beneath its horses' hooves. One poor wounded man has his jaw carried away. Another, his head shattered. A third, who could have been saved, had his chest beaten in. Here come the artillery. The guns crash over the dead and wounded, strewn pell-mell on the ground. Brains spurt under the wheels. Limbs are broken and torn. Bodies mutilated past recognition. The soil is literally puddled with blood, and the plain littered with human remains." Unquote. This was the battle that would decide the fate of Italy. The French carried the small town of Solferino, but through some of the most miserable conditions soldiers have had to endure. The French artillery again delivered accurate and devastating fire. However, on the French right, Niel's corps was in a similar hellish predicament outside the town of Robecco. They failed to capture the town despite the resolve of the French grenadiers and zouaves. Farther along the line, on the extreme French left, the Piedmontese army met the Austrian 8th Corps near Madonna della Scoperta and San Martino. Much like at Solferino, both forces surprised one another, and Austria was able to take up much stronger positions. The Italian general, Mollard, decided not to wait for the rest of his division and marched to attack with his few men. The disorganized and weak attacks made by the Italians were all held up by ferocious Austrian resistance. The attack on Madonna della Scoperta went much better, the Royal Guard of Piedmont storming the village. By 7:30, the last assault on San Martino was about to begin. The concentrated Italian front finally managed to push the Austrians off the hill after storming the Cascina Contracania. The fighting was over, with Allied armies in command of the field. The battlefield was an absolute nightmare. Over 40,000 people were mangled or killed in the devastating 17-mile, day-long fight. The losses appalled Napoleon. There could not be another battle like Solferino. After the fight, Henry Dunant, who was moved by the suffering of the soldiers, started the International Red Cross and created the guidelines for the Geneva Convention. The French emperor met with Franz Joseph in secret and established the Peace of Villafranca. His men's suffering was clearly on Napoleon's mind. Likewise, the possibility of Prussia intervening in the war seriously forced Napoleon's hand. He could not afford a fight on two fronts. He showed once more that he was nothing like his uncle. Cavour was outraged by the terms of the deal at Villafranca. In it stated that Venice was to remain an Austrian dependency. Lombardy was transferred to France, then to Piedmont, and the dukes were to be reappointed. On top of this, the original plan to form an Italian confederation under the Pope's control was kept. Cavour felt betrayed by these conditions. He vehemently advised King Victor to reject the treaty and continue the war alone. The king outright refused, and a violent episode is said to have taken place between the two men. Cavour resigned immediately, stormed out, and met with the Hungarian revolutionary leader Kossuth, to whom he said, quote, "The treaty shall not be executed. I will become a conspirator. I will become a revolutionary, but the treaty shall not be executed. No, 1,000 times no. Never, never." Unquote. The terms drawn up in the treaty were not in keeping with the reality on the ground. The Central Italian revolutions of 1859 were uprisings headed by the bourgeoisie leadership of the new business class in Italy. Cavour exploited his connections with these revolutionary leaders to build a coalition of pro-Piedmont statesmen. These leaders would lobby the international community toward fusion with Piedmont against the wishes of the Treaty of Villafranca. With this plan in place, Cavour resigned as prime minister and retired to public life, although he knew he would return.